let's get started. Welcome to the Talis Aspire API Primer webinar. My name is Richard Tattersall. I imagine many of you have encountered me at some point in support tickets or at Insight or various places. So I work as a technical consultant at Talis, and also on the call here is my colleague consultant, Tim Hodson. During this webinar, as Tim said, please do ask any questions that you may have, and Tim will be gathering them, hopefully, thanks Tim, and we'll go through them at the end. Some people on this call may be more technically inclined, some people aren't, and that's absolutely fine. Whilst there is going to be more of a technical focus on this webinar than with a lot of the webinars we may do, it's intended to give you more of an overview of what's possible, as well as just some starting guidelines as to how to do it. So it should hopefully fit all use cases and everybody that is here. Hopefully everyone can see the screen. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay, by the way. I should have checked that. If not, do shout out and we'll try and resolve that. So the outline of this webinar is as follows. First of all, what is an API? Then we're going to look at some of the use cases for the APIs in Talis Aspire. We're going to look at what our APIs actually look like. We're going to go through a few simple usage examples, and then we're going to talk about what's next. Where do you go from here? How do you actually start using APIs in your own systems, the Talis Aspire APIs in your own systems? So what are APIs? The most basic question. So for some people on here that maybe work with APIs on a daily basis, you probably already know this, but it's always good to refresh anyway. So essentially, what are APIs? APIs allow the sharing of data between different systems. They also allow the writing of data between different systems. APIs are intended for two pieces of software to talk to each other, which may be completely different pieces of software, maybe completely different parts of the world, to be able to share data. They can also be used, of course, by users, individual people, to just get simple bits of data and investigate data that's there and make changes on an ad hoc basis. I certainly use these as part of my daily job, and some of you may do, but their main intention is to create a standard way so pieces of software can work together. Essentially, we have the two pieces of software agreeing on a contract to each other, saying, if you send me this piece of data, I'll send you this piece of data back. Or maybe if you send me this piece of data, I will make this change and then send you this piece of data back. For the completionists out there, API stands for Application Programming Interface, but no one ever says that, so forget you ever heard it. Use cases for APIs in Talis Aspire. Why might you want to use APIs in Talis Aspire? I've split these use cases into two sections. This first slide, we're going to talk about the read use cases. So what data might you want to get from Talis Aspire into your own systems in a programmatical way, and why? So one simple use is to discover the lists by module or department, or more specifically by node. You've probably heard us mention the term nodes a lot at Talis Aspire. Essentially, any point on your hierarchy, whether it's a module, a department, a faculty, however you break it up in your own system, each of those is considered a node. And with nodes come lists. You can attach lists to nodes, which often are modules or courses or whatever the verb or the terminology you use is. One very common use case is you may have a particular module code and you may wish to know what lists are attached to that module. And that's one use of the APIs. Another use is to get a structure for the list overall, which you may wish to embed within other services. For example, you may have some sort of module system internally, module management system, which you want to go into the module and get a rough overview of what the list looks like in terms of structure, what kind of sections you have, etc. And so as part of that system, you could extend that to building a tool to call to our APIs to get information on that list. You can discover if a list has been reviewed. You can find out what stage of review that list might be at, and you can build that into whatever local tooling you have on your side, which keeps track of these things. Again, maybe some sort of module management system, or however you structure things on your side and whatever tools are available to you. Of course, there's many, many, many more options. Those are just 3 basic ideas that kind of came out of my head, and hopefully you've already got some ideas of areas of the system where which you may want to automate a bit more, gather more information. Let's look at a few right cases, reasons why you may want to use our APIs to actually write to Talis Aspire to change the data you've got in there. So let's go back to the module management system. Maybe you've got some system which tracks modules as they're in development and goes through various stages of approval. Then eventually you get to the point where it gets approved. Well, what you probably do at the moment is once it gets approved, then someone has to be informed of that, and they have to go off to reading lists and create a list and add all the information, etc., etc. Maybe you could automate that. Maybe you have information as part of your module management system which allows you to create a list template. So once it gets approved, it goes off and it adds in the module if it doesn't exist, or just adds a list to the module, and then you can populate it with perhaps a basic list structure, section week 1, week 2, week 3, however you prefer to use it. Depending on how much information you have at this point, depending on how much information you can put in, potentially you could build the entire list from scratch if you have all that information. You could dynamically publish lists when the module is approved. Perhaps you've already manually pre-created the list and you're just waiting for that moment when someone says, yes, we're good, we go, let's have it. And then at the moment you click in your module management system that module's been approved, that list's been approved, then you ping off to Talis Aspire and say, please publish this list, we're a go. You could also dynamically update resources on lists as they change in your catalog. Of course, catalog information changes all the time, and maybe a particular item has been removed from your catalog, for instance. So all of a sudden the LCN no longer exists, your local control number. You may wish to use that as an opportunity to fire off an API request to Talis Aspire to say, this resource in the system, let's find it and let's update the LCN to remove it. Or maybe something else has changed, the ISBN, but you had an incorrect ISBN, I don't know, something's changed and you need to update all the instances in Talis Aspire as it goes. It may of course also be that perhaps you've just got a new web address link, a new 856 that needs to be updated and for a resource. Or leading on from that, maybe you've got a whole bunch of new web addresses. Maybe you've purchased a whole bunch of new ebooks, or just changed your supplier in some format, and you need to modify address that are already there or perhaps weren't there before over many different resources. You can build a tool which can sit there and iterate through all of your data in Talis Aspire, find everything that matches whatever your use case is, and update all of these items in bulk. Again, many more options. Hopefully you've got ideas already of parts of your system which are very manual at the moment, which you could automate and just save those extra bits of clicks, that extra time, that extra brain power of someone thinking about the steps. Now let's move on to what the APIs in Talis Aspire actually look like. We've talked about some possible examples. Let's start having a look. There are 3 generations of APIs in Talis Aspire, which I've outlined here. From left to right in terms of age, we've got your classic APIs, we've got your V2 APIs and your V3 APIs. The V3 APIs are what we're going to focus on primarily in this webinar, because these are our latest, these are our cutting edge version 3, that's what the V stands for, APIs. But just for completeness, let's just explain what each generation does, because all of these still exist if you wish to use them. The classic APIs were our first APIs, which were put in many years ago. They are all public, so there's no auth needed, but there's also no information that isn't public that you can get from it. So you can't get information on draft lists, for example, or users, anything that we wouldn't put just publicly out there. It's based on JSON RDF graph data. Those of you that are more technical might know what that is. Don't worry about it. It's basically a format which is not as well used today, so we've been moving away from it in our later APIs. But that's what it was based on. These are still available, but less versatile than what we've now got. Moving on to the V2 or version 2 APIs, here's where we introduced a layer of authentication using OAuth 2. That allows us to start returning data which isn't necessarily publicly available. So draft lists, user information, things such as that, because before you get to it, you've got to authenticate as yourselves. We'll give you a key and secret, which allows us to know that you're you. From this, we also get a lot richer and deeper data. There's many more endpoints, many more pieces of data that you can get. All of it is built with much more modern API standards for the modern web. It's all returns in JSON formats. It's something very versatile, very well known by developers today, very easy to use. It is all read only, and but it is very stable. It's worth noting that the V2 APIs were built originally to support our review system. Some of you may remember when our review systems got a major overhaul a few years ago, and these APIs were originally built internally to support our new apps and tooling. Therefore, they're very much built with a focus for what was needed at the time to, and still needed, to power our reviews system. It doesn't include information, for example, such as the entire structure of a list. And that's why we've now moved on to the V3 APIs. The V3 APIs were built very much how the V2 APIs were built to power our the reviews, the updated review system, the new list view, which is just the list view now for pretty much everybody. That is all powered by the V3 APIs, meaning that a lot more information on the list structure and all things around the list, everything that's needed to create that list view, all that data comes through from the V3 APIs. So it is very similar to the V2 APIs in that we're OAuth 2 authenticated. It maintains all the features such as JSON and the modern API standards, built with lists in mind. We're also including writable routes in it. Writable routes, I should stress, are still the most new of all of this. These have been put in to support our newer list edit revamp, which some of you will have seen. So they are in production and they are being used, but they are also liable to potential change as we discover more about them and the new list edit gets more and more used. So if you do use these, please discuss it with us if you can about what you plan to do, and we can work with you to figure out the best way of doing your route, just because it's as new to us as it is to you. So if you are looking at writable stuff, please discuss with us. All the V3 APIs are in development, liable to change. As I say, more likely the writable, but essentially they are all being used in production. So now let's move on and take more of a look at these V3 APIs that I'm discussing. They all require a key and secret. As I've mentioned, they're all OAuth authenticated. If you want a key and secret and you want to start looking at these APIs, please just open us a report ticket to request credentials from us, and we will get back to you with those as soon as we can. If you can give us any information about what it is you're trying to do with those credentials, that would be really interesting to hear what your ideas are. We might even be able to help guide you towards a solution. But if you just want to play with them, that's fine. No problem at all. Just let us know. As I've already mentioned, the read routes are very stable now, but may still be subject to change. The write routes are newer and a little bit more subject to change. One thing to note is the student numbers routes or areas of this that you can get back are very likely to change soon. There is a revamp going on there. So for the time being, don't plan any major work around trying to pull student numbers from these. But that's a point in time thing where we are at this point of this webinar. And let us know if you'd like to explore the right routes. I already discussed that on the previous slide. I clearly got ahead of myself. Fantastic. Let's look at some actual practical examples, which is why some of us are here. Before getting into the technical examples, I just want to go over some of the behind the scenes stuff. I've already gone over a lot of this already, but just need to just make sure we're all comfortable with it. All of the V3 routes are authenticated with OAuth 2. So we give you a key and secret, you authenticate, you get a token, and you can then make requests. We'll go through how you do that in just a second. All of these routes are REST. If you know what that is, if you're a more techie, API kind of person, you live with APIs, you probably know what that is. If you don't and you want to know, go and Google it. It's really, well, I say it's interesting stuff if you're into that stuff. If not, it doesn't matter. Essentially, we're going to give you a bunch of endpoints that you hit. You don't need to know what REST means for this to work. All of them will return JSON data to you. The current documentation for them can be found at rl.talis.com/3/docs. Again, that is subject to change. As I say, they are changing over time, but it is largely up to date and working. And for these demonstrations that I'm about to go through, we're going to use a tool called Postman. Postman is a graphical user interface way of making API requests. Really, really good for testing API requests. You can use obviously almost anything that you would normally use to make API requests. You can do it via the command line. I will show an example of that working a little bit. You can use different languages, Python, Golang, PHP, Perl, anything you wish to use. But for the purpose of this, we're going to use Postman because it makes things very simple and very easy to see. I use Postman on a daily basis whenever I have to investigate an API. It's very, very handy. First of all, we're going to look at how to authenticate. I've already said we need a key and secret. We'll OAuth 2 against an endpoint. This is the endpoint. Don't worry about remembering it. We have documentation on our support pages which can guide you through that, but that's the endpoint. It will return a token to you, which will be used to authenticate against API requests. The token basically says, yes, this person can do this thing. And then you'll pass that through with API requests that you then make, and everyone's happy, everything's brilliant. You get to make your API requests. Each token does have a limited lifetime. It will expire after a certain amount of time. So you will have to make sure that in any tools you build, which perhaps a long-running job, something that's going off and doing its thing, it will have to check for a status where the authentication ends and it says you're no longer authenticated. And when that happens, all you need to do is request a new token and carry on. Let's look at how to, using Postman, actually make, get a token. So I've pre-recorded some uses in Postman because we all know what happens when you try things on the night. I'm not risking that. So I've done some screencasts of me previously going through these examples. So let's have a look at the first one. Hopefully you can see it. So essentially, we go up to the authorization tab in Postman. We select OAuth 2. We click Get New Token, and we fill in our details. It's really that straightforward. I'm not going to fill in the details here because that will involve putting in my client ID and secret, and there's no way to hide that in this. So just imagine we fill it in. On this screen, we put in the token name at the top is just for Postman purposes, so you know what it is you're connecting to in the future. You put in the URL, which is the token, which is the URL I gave you on the previous slide. Again, it's in our docs, don't worry about remembering it, which is basically the endpoint we hit to get a token. Then you put in your ID and your secret, username and password in other terminology, if that's what you want to think of it as, ID and secret in REST API terminology, and that's it. You send it as a base auth header, so there's nothing else you need to change with that last bottom option. You click request token and you get your token. I think on the next screen I thought there's another button to then use token, but again, I had to stop recording at this point. You can imagine it's fairly straightforward. So let's just run through that one more time. We're in Postman here. We go and click authorization. We select the type, which is OAuth 2. We click Get New Access Token. You fill in the details there. You click Request Token, and then on the next screen, Use Token, and Postman handles everything else. Very straightforward. So Let's move on to an actual example of data we're trying to get. So let's get the data for this list. So here's an example test list on our demonstration tenancy. We use Broadminster. I'm sure you've all encountered Broadminster before, and it's called Introduction to Sociology. So we want to get all the information for this in an API format via the APIs for whatever purposes we may wish to use it elsewhere. I've recorded another example here, another it'll be all right and a nice example of us now using Postman for after having got our token to then request the data for that list. Oh, it's jumped ahead. Why did it jump ahead? Behave, behave. Let's try again. There we go. Excellent. So you can see here, we've gone and stepped through the process. The access token is filled in. And now we put in our endpoint. So you can see here our endpoint always starts off looking the same. It starts off with rl.talis.com. So it's https rl.talis.com/3. That says we're using the v3 APIs. After that, we've got Broadminster. As I say, we're using our demonstration tenancy that we often use, which is Broadminster University. This will be your shortcode. So whatever the shortcode is for your tenancy, that's what you put in here. And all of your API requests will start off, or your v3 API requests will start off with that basic information. Talis.com, rl.talis.com, 3, and then your shortcode, so we know who it is and what you're trying to do. Next, we have the word lists. Straightforward, we're trying to get information on a list. So that's telling the system it's something to do with a list. After that, we have this long number. You probably recognize this because you see this whenever you view a list in Talis Aspire, and it's basically the identifier, what we call a UUID. It's a unique identifier for every thing we have, let's just say every list in Talis Aspire is identified by this kind of identifier, which looks like this. You'll also notice if you dig in deeper, all sections have a UUID, or resources, or items, etc., etc. It's the identifier format we use in Talis Aspire. So essentially, going back, we've put in our base information, rl.talis.com, 3 Broadminster, we said lists, we're looking for something to do with a list, and we've put in our identifier, our UUID. So with all that information, actually one more piece of information that's important to go through is this verb here on the left, which says get. So the REST APIs have multiple verbs which can be used to describe what you're trying to do. Here we're trying to get information. It's a read operation. So we make sure we say get, so it knows at that endpoint that we've put in, we're trying to get information. We're trying to get the list. With all that together, let's go and make this actual request. So we click send, and we have our response at the bottom. Hopefully you can see that. We have our list. It says Introduction to Sociology is the title. We have created, published, updated information, got published status. As I said before, ignore the student number stuff for now, that needs updating. We have here relationships. Now the relationships part is important because the relationships basically says what things attach to this thing. So the main thing, the context we're talking about here is a list. The thing is a list, and we want to know what other information can be attached to it. And under this relationships, that tells us, so we have tenant. So you can get tenant information, you have all children, we have sections. Now remember sections, we're going to delve into this a little bit more in a second. And before going any further, you can see it shows all the sections on this list. However, all it's giving us is the ID. It's not giving us any kind of structure or anything. It's just telling us these sections exist on the list. We can do better than that, and we'll do better than that in just a second. But let's just plow down a little bit more information as part of the relationships. And then at the bottom here, we have this links section. Now, the other thing you'll notice we don't have is any information on items. This links section tells us more information about further API links we can go to that might give us more information about what we're trying to do. So the first one here is self, and that gives us information on the just itself. What is this information we've got? The context that we look at this information in. At the bottom we have review, so it's information on a review that's part of this list. Then in the middle we have items, and then this is giving us, first it's giving us a count, which is quite handy, but it's also giving us a link to where we can get the item information from. And if you look at it, it's basically just an API endpoint. If you look at our API docs, you will see that endpoint documented in there, which is the same endpoint as we had for the list /items. We'll go and get that in a bit, but before we go and get that, we want to go and have a look at these sections. How do we get that section information? So we want to hydrate the response, which basically means adding more information in. Here is another video I've pre-prepared. Excellent. So we started at the point we were before. We've got this information, and we want to get the information from the relationships area. So if you recall, I'll scroll down a bit. Oh no, don't even scroll down. It's right here on the bottom of the screen. We have what says relationships, and under there we had tenant, all children, sections, etc. Those are the things that can attach to this list. We want to get the sections. You can put in any of these. We can search for the tenant, search for the all children, etc. But we want to look for sections. To do that, we add a query parameter. Those that are more tech, you'll know what query parameters are, but just for completeness, you start with a question mark after the main URL, and then you can put in your query parameters. So for this query parameter, we want to put in include. Oh, no, I pressed the wrong button and jumped ahead. My apologies. Let me go back and find where I was. Go back. Okay. So put in include, and past me decided to partially cover it up with my cursor. Apologies for that when I recorded the video. And so we want to put include equals sections. This will get us the section information. You can hydrate with more than one thing. You can do sections, comma, all children, sections, comma, tenant, whatever is under the relationships area. So we want to include equal sections. So with that simple addition, we're going to hydrate the sections into the response. So let's click send. Brilliant. And now we have what looks like at first exactly the same information, because it is the same information. We have the list data as before, but once we get to the bottom of that area, you'll see we suddenly have this included section. And the included section is everything that we've added in the hydration. And here we have all of our sections. So we can see right here, we have the section with the identifier for the section and the title, the description, and all of its own children. So you can see under there all of the items that belong under there. And that is the next stage. That's how we get the sections, and you can add in more information if you want. Now, the last part of this, of course, is how do we get the items? Well, the items, we had the clue from the previous video where you saw at the bottom, we had that section which said links. And the links gave us a link to where we get the items from to really help us out. Again, it's documented in the API docs. If you're not going through through the list initially, you can just go straight to the items. But in terms of like the API is helping you feel out where you are, that's how we can do it. So let's get those items. So here we go with another video. So at the top here, we're going to put in /items, which if you recall was what it says at the bottom here under the href for the items. And then we send it, and we have our item data. So if we scroll down, we have all of our items, one after the other, down. So let's just look at the first one. So we have our item, we have a student note for it, we have its own relationships, important, etc. The one thing you will notice is it doesn't have any actual bib data. That's an important distinction to make for anyone working on this. We have a different concept between resources and items in Talis Aspire. An item is a resource which exists on a list. So a resource is a bibliographic resource, so it contains all the bibliographic data. Once you put it on a list, it becomes an item. But they are still separate things. So what we have here is basically all of the information for the items. All the information for the items in terms of the information that's specific to an item. So that is the stuff that would only appear on the list. So we have your student notes, etc., etc. What's the word I'm searching for? Importance. There you go. I knew it was written down somewhere. So you have your importance information. If you want to get more information on the resources, again, we can delve in deeper using the tools I've already shown you to get that resource information from the system. I won't go into doing that anymore. I'm sure from this, we've seen how we can go through and pull all information. And from there, it's just up to you exploring and discovering what you can do to get all of your information. And from that, you can pull all the information you need to build a list, or whatever you're trying to do on your side. I mean, if you're trying to rebuild a list on your side, okay, fair enough, it'd be a bit crazy, but go for it. But more importantly, for whatever particular tooling you want to do, however that data can fit into your own tooling on your side, that can be done. I'd like to just show a CLI request happening, just to show it can be done. So all of these requests are possible through command line tools, through a terminal. So it's less user-friendly than using a tool such as Postman, which I've been using up to now, but is much more useful if you start to want to do things programmatically, or if you just live in the command line a bit more, like I do. And of course, it can be built into larger scripts. So let's have a look at that pre-recorded video. So at the top here, first thing we need to do is request a token. Exactly the same as the first step with Postman, we need to request a token using the credentials we've got. There's a little bit more going on here. I won't break this down step by step. We'll have the information on our support pages if you'd like this to get more detail with this. But essentially, we're calling using curl to call an endpoint, which is our tokens endpoint. We're passing a client and secret, which I've already put into my terminal environment, so I don't have to type it on the screen. And then we're pulling out of that the access token. Again, we'll jump past this. I'm not going to pull it down in any more detail. And then whenever, there you go, we press enter, so we've got it. And to show, I'm going to echo out that token, just on the command line to show we now have a token stored in the variable token. Excellent. Of course, normally you wouldn't want to show the token you've got to anyone else, because that is your key that lets you get in and make changes. In this scenario, it's completely fine because I made this request quite a while ago, so that token has expired now. Remember me saying they will always expire after a short time, so that's useless. But if you've got a brand new key, don't share it with anyone. People can use it to do things in your tenancy. Using that token, we can now go and make a request. We're just going to make the same request that we made first off, using the get request for that same list. So let me go and find the command. I put it in command line earlier to make sure I didn't mess up. Make a typo when I was typing it. So there we go. So here is the request, and you'll see the request looks very, very similar to what you'd expect. We're doing a curl endpoint to a get, using a get verb to this list. The key thing we're doing differently here that we didn't have to do in Postman, because Postman handled it itself, is we're passing this header -h authorization : bearer and then our token. That's how the token gets passed through with the request, as a header: authorization : bearer token. As I say, Postman handled that bit for us, which is why Postman's really nice. It hides a lot of that behind the scenes, so we don't have to worry about it. But here we've got to do it ourselves. Don't need to worry about it anymore. It's just that pattern with the token. You'll notice we're also passing through cache control, no cache. That's just to make sure we're not caching requests as we go and getting confused about data we're getting back that should have been updated, that hasn't been updated. That's beyond the scope of this webinar to go into and what's going on there. We'll just say that's the thing you've got to do. It makes everyone's lives happier. Now, I think past me recording this video clearly talked over it whilst highlighting, so let me skip ahead because I've already talked over it. And then to the point where I actually make the request, which I think is about here. Skip on. There we go. So I've made the request now. And we have our string back of the JSON data. It's exactly the same as the data we got in the Postman request, although it's all bunched together. There's no formatting, so it's a bit hard to read. But if you're doing programmatical stuff, this is exactly what you want, because then your program can break it down and do what it needs. But just for completeness, let's pass it through another tool on the command line called JQ. Let's skip ahead in the video to find out where I'm doing that. Here we go. It's called JQ, which is basically a JSON querying tool, which I like to use for command line stuff, which will just basically make it look pretty so we can read it. So if we then pass it through JQ, whenever past me presses enter, there we go. You can see all that data's now been passed, and it's exactly the same as the data we got from our first request in Postman. Excellent. And so all the things you may want to do, you can do from the command line or whatever tooling you're using. So let us move on to making a write request. This is the last task we're going to do. Is we're going to take this list, which is a list with an old title, which conveniently has a title list with old title, and we're going to update it to something more interesting. This again is on our Broadminster tenancy, and so if we go to the example video I made, I've pre-filled this rather than filling it as we go this time, because there's a few elements, and rather than suddenly realizing I've missed something or put a typo in as I go, I thought I'd pre-fill it and we'll just talk through what I've done. So essentially we're posting to the same endpoint, you'll notice, in where the web address is, as we're doing with the get address. It's exactly the same thing. Talis, rltalis.com 3 Broadminster/list/the list UUID. It's a different list, so it's different list UUID, but it's essentially the same thing. And the only difference here is we've changed the verb to patch from get. Patch is basically a way of saying update. Get is read information, patch is update information. There are other verbs such as post, which is create information, but if you're getting into that, you're probably doing something programmatical, and you probably know about it or be at the point of reading about it. So for this update, we're doing a patch request. Now, what we're patching is down here in this middle blob of data, where if you look directly below where the address is, you can see I'm in the body section in Postman, and then I've selected raw. I'm passing through some raw data, and then the data here is in a JSON format. And you see here we have a bit labeled data, and we have type lists. We have to tell it what type it is, ID, and the ID. Just confirm the ID to make sure it's matching with what we're actually trying to patch with, so we're not getting horribly confused and making a mistake. And the attributes is what we're actually going to update. And we're going to update the title to be API Primer Updated Title. At the bottom, you can see the data we already have. Prior to getting to this point, I just did a get request on the list just to make sure I had the right list and see what it looked like. So I've already done that get request prior to starting this video, and you see at the bottom we have the list, and the title is currently list with old title. When we press send, then that is going to get updated with the new title to be using in that information to become API Primer Updated Title. And then thank you, Past Me, for doing lots of highlighting. I've already talked through it. Get ahead of myself. So there's the address we're going to post to with the UUID for the list. We've changed the verb to patch. Everything looks good. And so now we just need to send it. Oh, sorry, no. Thank you, Past Me, for reminding me of one important thing that I missed. X-effective user. When we're making a write request, we need to pass through the user who is making that request. Everything in Talis Aspire, particularly with list updates, for example, is done by a user, and we track who's done what. More importantly, we track if that user can make that change. Can a user update a list? Do they have list pub, for example, however your permissions are set up in your tenancy? So as part of this, we have to pass through a user. That user could be just a generic user that you're using, and you want all of your requests from your APIs, whatever tooling you built, to go through a single user, just so you know that's our API user. Or it could be that maybe a user's made an update in a system that you've got, so your module tracking system, and that update makes a change on the list, maybe change the title or something, and then you want to reflect in that list that that user's made the change, in which case you just pass through that user's ID. The ID in question is called a GUID, and we can get that information from the users reports that you can download from Talis Aspire. So if you want to know that ID, just download that report. You can find the users, and you can update with that ID. So with all that information, with the X-effective user put in, this is being passed through as a header, by the way. If you're doing it as on the command line, it's just a header. Again, just read the documentation. It should explain that. And now hopefully Past Me is going to go and press send. Oh, it's buffering. Of course it's buffering. It'll be all right in the night video. I'll skip ahead of it. Skip ahead of it. There we go. Here is past me pressing send, and we have our response. And you can see we have the list that's come back with the new updated title. So that's worked. We also have a 200 response that we can see in the status, just slightly above there on the right in green, to tell you that that worked as expected, and it also tells you how long it took. Now, let's have a quick look at the list, and we can see, okay, I've taken a screenshot of it from my example, we can see that that list title has indeed been updated. So that's it. That's taken us going through a getting credentials, making a read request, how to hydrate that read request, and all the related read requests you might want to do, and finally making a write request. So hopefully you'll be starting to see all of the power that can be made with these APIs. Before moving on to the very final slide, quick note on what's called e-tags. So this is only important if you start getting to the point of trying to change a list structure. Whenever you change a list structure, you have to pass through a valid e-tag. The e-tag is basically a hash of the current list state. It basically says the current list should look like this. It's just a hash, it's a string. You can request that via the APIs. If you want to make an update to the list structure, that's required to prevent two different things, perhaps two people or two tools or whatever, trying to change the same list at the same time, because that can cause issues with trying to work out, well, what's actually supposed to go where, etc., if they make clashing changes, for example. So all you need to remember is if you're trying to do something that might change the list structure, you need to get the current e-tag, and then every time you make an update, you'll get a new e-tag of the updated list structure before making your next update. There's not much more to say than that. Just make sure you do it. It's in the documentation. Any questions on it, ask us and we can guide you through it. So what's next? So we've gone through everything. We've gone through all the things you can do. Hopefully you've got some ideas of what you can do. I hope you had some ideas before you came of things you were thinking, oh, great, we can do this. So in terms of what's next, raise a support ticket with us if you'd like to get API credentials, so you can start exploring this. Do let us know if you want to use the right APIs. As I say, they're still new to us as they are to you, so it'd be great if we could just work with you on them. But of course, if you're not planning to use the right APIs, we'd still love to know what tools you're trying to build to get an idea of what you're trying to do, your needs, and maybe we can help support you in guiding you towards the best route to do what you're trying to do. And lastly, read the API docs at rl@talis.com/3/docs. There are more docs, of course, on our support site, which I probably should have put on here, but hopefully you'll know it by now, support.talis.com. And more docs will come on over time. Any more information, raise a support ticket and ask us as always. So that's the end of that. If there are any questions that have come in, anything that's happened, anything you'd like to raise now, now's the time. Have we had anything, Tim?
No questions at this stage.
Fantastic. Hopefully, hopefully that means everything was fantastically clear as opposed to very confusing. Either way, if anything comes in, we'll hang around for a few more minutes, I think, if there are any more questions anyone's thinking about or burning to ask. And if not, we will